Hey everyone, my name's Junior Smart and I want to just applaud you. If you're watching this, if you're working with young people or their families, if you are involved and engaging with some of our most marginalised group in whatever capacity, be that a doctor, a teacher, a parent, be that an outreach worker, be that one of our amazing social care staff, or whether you're involved in the NHS, if you're involved in the care of any young person, I just want to applaud you and I just want to really thank you so much for the work that you've been doing for so long that's been underestimated and undervalued. If you're watching this is from the heart. It's a real big thanks to you for the work you're doing, and so I just want to just motivate you because there is so much more that needs to be done. In this video, I just wanted to talk about the COVID-19. So much has been done in this field already. There's been so many more commentators that have talked about it in a much better way. But what I wanted to do is just give some really big brushstrokes as to how and why it really is a big concern for us when it comes to working with the most marginalised groups, and why it should be a key concern for any worker doing this stuff in the field, because if we're not careful, they will become the hidden casualties of this epidemic. Firstly, it's important to recognise how the virus moves and how the virus operates. Okay, so all the literature out there is talking about how it is spread in a very similar way to coughs, colds and flus. That is through droplets, through moisture in the air, which means close proximity. It means coughing, sneezing, being in the proximity of people around you that are infected. Then there's also the fact that it can stay active on the surfaces. Now, different literature is saying anything from a few hours to a few days. In addition to actually having that contact, then you've got the actual contact between their hand and the face. And different studies have said that actually, people can touch their faces up to 23 times in an hour. Think about young people and think about how county lines and child criminal exploitation operates. I want you to think about young people that are in your care and think about how they stay in proximity to each other. Think about the things that they do. If you think about it, the virus is almost made for a typical drug dealer because everything is hand to hand, hand to mouth. If you think about the young people, they tend to nudge each other, they tend to hug each other, they tend to take selfies. Think about typically they tend to pass drinks to one another, they pass spliffs to one another. Everything is based in close proximity. In addition, think about the typical hygiene of a young person. I don't know about the young people that you might have in your care, but quite often, until they reach that grumpy, grunty teenager age, they tend to be afraid of water. Hygiene, if you think about typically young people that are plugging drugs, hygiene tends to be low on the list. And then in addition, I want you to think about their messages that young people hear, especially about adults, especially about the authorities, which is that adults should not be trusted, you should handle things on your own, don't talk to people, especially not the authorities. And all of this collectively merges itself into a situation where young people are not going to be taking notice of social distancing measures. They're not going to be taking note of the messages that they might be hearing in the press, which is to self-isolate. Also, these are people that are not likely to follow guidelines, not likely to wait in queues, not likely to contact the NHS if they collectively or individually get those symptoms. These are young people that might very well say, and this is quite common, I've spoken to loads of young people that are saying, well, you know what, I think I've already had it. And equally, you've got the fact that most young people will be open to all of the conspiracy theories as well. So, you know, it's a big government conspiracy. You know, I've heard a few people say that already. You know, the vaccine, some people have been talking about the vaccine is the government's way of, they're now going to inject you with a chip and you're going to end up being controlled by the government. And equally, you've got some people talking about how it's all about 5G masks and it's all about that, and all of that detracts from the reality. And the reality is that this virus is out there, and it's killing people and it's taking people's lives. This whole thing means that young people by themselves are highly likely to be carriers of the virus, and they're highly likely to, once they have the virus, to spread it and to pass it on in contact to everyone that's around them, including the most vulnerable, which could even be members of their own household, the youngest sibling or the most eldest sibling, especially because they're vulnerable. So let's look at how the virus affects people. We're going to break this down into 3 sections. You've got the physical, you've got the mental, and you've got the online. And let's have a look at all 3. But let's start with the physical. We have to be serious about this. Home may not be a safe place for that young person, for that family member, for that parent who's experiencing domestic violence. Home might not be a safe place because of the overcrowding. Many of our clients come from homes with multiple occupancy. There's going to be the stress, therefore, there's going to be the abuse, there could be neglect happening. Statutory and approved premises care has also had its issues. So across the board, we've had some reports, although they've been anecdotal, that these premises have been left unmanned because the staff have also been scared about contracting the virus. This is very, very serious. Then we've got to consider the impact of nutrition, malnutrition. If we're talking about a time where family's going to have a lower household income, lower than normal, so what happens to the dietary requirements? What happens to the food supply? What happens to that food supply when that family are going, you know, to the supermarket and the shelves are empty? Can you imagine a typical client and their family heavily laden down with a number of children waiting in the queue outside of their supermarket and still having to social distance, waiting for hours to only go in, and we have all of the rules around following the arrows on the floor or whatever else, and then having to do the shopping. There's been so many reports in this field. So either, you know, those families haven't had access to the money that they need in order to buy the shopping. You've had trouble with access to food. Then you had the families already that were on food banks, and I am worried about what happens to the malnutrition of those children in those households. Who's teaching those parents or those young people to eat healthily? And then what happens, you know, when you've had that kind of diet over a sustained period of time? Then we've got to consider the impact on homelessness. You know, are many families coping? How are they staying on top of their rent payments or their repayments or their arrears? Yeah, you've got the issues of young people being kicked out of the family home, if not even the family members being kicked out of the home through lack of payment. And then you've got those being released from custody. Oh my gosh, there's been some crazy stories, you know, a kid from Scotland being released in London, and lo and behold, kid from London being released from Scotland prisons. Like, how is that all happening? Like, it just defies belief. Then you've got the issues around, you know, actual physical incarceration. Business hasn't ceased, but this makes them actually stick out, more likely, more prone to be arrested, because now the police don't actually have to have a reason to stop a young person. So those dealing or drug running are more likely to get stopped and searched, and certainly arrested if they're in possession. For drug users, there's also another issue, you know, reduced availability of drugs. Now, across the board, again, this has been a bit of a mixed bag. So cannabis largely was always homegrown, but the demands on that supply has meant there's been a bit of a price hike. But on top of that, you've also had the turn towards crack cocaine and heroin as alternative use, because users are at home longer, you've got boredom, you've got escapism, and then in addition, where there's been droughts in these drug types, people have been turning more towards prescription drugs. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means there's a bit of a change in concentration. It means that there's likely to be more people that are overdosing or becoming addicted to different types of substances. It's very, very serious. And then lastly, I'd just like to put across a really big brushstroke. If you consider how drugs are funded, it largely falls into a number of different categories. So on one end, you've got the functioning drug users, or those that use drugs recreationally, now turning into mainstay taking of drugs, and that they were usually funded through their mainstream employment. These are the ones that take drugs and they're totally functioning and it has no impact. Then you've got those that are on benefit and the impact that it has on those. These are the less functioning, the average or lower end functioning drug user. And then on the lower end of the scale, you've got those that are non-functioning drug users, and these are the ones that would typically fund their drug habit through the likes of burglary, shoplifting, begging, sex work, or allowing, for example, your property to be cocooned. This should be a real concern for us, and the impact on those sort of lower end users, the impact that this epidemic is having on how they are able to fund their drug habit and what they then choose to do about that. Let's have a look at the mental impact. The big thing around the mental impact is it plays to the adult spheres, not the young people. So think about the messages that young people are receiving about it. For example, that is, it kills mainly the old, not the young. Like I said already about the conspiracy theories, and then take into the fact that young people are prone to risk-taking behaviour anyway. Then you've got the knock-on mental and emotional effects. You know, the damage to the well-being which is going to be caused by abuse, perhaps the violence that's happening in the home, but now that's in close proximity. You know, young people just can't get up and leave. Then you've got the impact of social isolation and social distancing. You've got the increase in drug use and how that plays itself out on the physical and the mental state. We've got to think about the impact that happens to a person's emotional well-being, because they can no longer access the services that were available to them, because a lot of services have now closed their doors, or they've reverted to skeleton services. I know that a lot of services have made a transition to being online, but then there are real big questions about how IT literate are the young people. This is certainly not true for everyone, and also how IT literate are their parents. You know, how quickly can a parent where English isn't their first language access support, for example, because they're experiencing domestic violence in the home. Like, how do they go about getting that help? How do they go about getting that support? Who do they turn to? This is before we take into account clients that already had existing emotional well-being issues. Certainly, I don't know about you, but for the clients that we're working with, post-traumatic stress was already a big part of them, just from their experiences previously. And you know, what do we do with those clients that have already experienced trauma, emotional trauma, mental trauma? And this is all before we take into account, you know, the penultimate impact, which will be clients that have going to experience trauma through losing people through the virus, and not being able to attend their funerals, not being able to sit with their loved ones, not being able to say goodbye. There's going to be a tertiary impact of this. It is worth pointing out that any impact to a parent or caregiver in this is likely to be exaggerated to the people in their care, and this in effect is going to intensify the reaction. So what's already there is likely to be intensified. Okay, let's talk about the online impact. Okay, so what we do know is that clients are more likely to engage with friends through online platforms, but with that comes this whole range of risks. So the impact of putting a young person at increased risk of, for example, grooming and exposure levels. So exposure levels is something that plays itself out in quite a real way. If certainly we're talking about engaging young people, helping young people exit from negative groups such as gangs or criminal activity, one of the things we definitely want to do is reduce that person's exposure levels. But that isn't going to be possible when everyone's congregating on the same platforms, and it's going to be harder to exit or disengage yourself from those negative groups when they are a part of the very fabric of the online community that you might be involved in. Then you've got the problems that arise through excessive online behaviour and the intensification of that. So for example, gambling, neurosis, objectification of women, which will come through things such as porn, sexual abuse, and the exposure of that both by predators and by victims. And then you've got the trolling and the abuse factors that happen with that, and the knock-on effects that plays itself out on through mental health. These are very, very serious issues. They already were that before this epidemic came into effect. What happens now? Okay, so I hope this message has been really useful to you. I just wanted to literally categorise and really highlight some of the real issues that are there in terms of the most vulnerable, the most marginalised group. And this, what I've presented to you today, isn't exhaustive. There's loads more issues that are going to arise over time. But I'm really interested to hear your views. So please leave a comment below and let me know if this video has been helpful to you. If there's any takeaway from this, I really want you to understand how important it is that we do not ignore the most marginalised and this key group, because failing that, they will become the hidden casualties of this epidemic and will be counting the effects on their generation for years to come. Thank you for listening.